Sometimes the night doesn't fall apart all at once. Sometimes it slips, slowly, quietly, until you look up and realize the margin is gone. That's what this weekend was about across the league. Pressure didn't arrive loudly, it waited. It asked questions late. It forced answers in uncomfortable moments. And the first answer came in Phoenix. Because when the game stopped making sense, when the flow broke, when the deficit grew, when the system didn't offer an easy solution, there was no panic, no search for something clever, no reaching for noise. There was just Devin Booker. And what he showed us wasn't flash. It was something heavier than that. It was what it looks like when a player understands that not every night can be saved by structure, and accepts that sometimes the responsibility lands on you, whether you ask for it or not. This wasn't about highlights. This wasn't about holding the game together long enough for one moment to matter. And that's where this weekend really began. Phoenix didn't win this game because everything worked. They won it because when everything stopped working, Devin Booker didn't. This wasn't a smooth night for Phoenix. This wasn't one of those games where the shots fall early and the math takes care of itself. They were down 18. And not that the kind of 18 that disappears with just one run. The kind that sits on you, possession after possession, while the clock keeps reminding you that control is slipping away. And the opponent matters here. Because the Oklahoma City Thunder don't panic. They don't give you easy air. They guard, they recover, and they keep asking the same question all night. Can you beat us again? That's the moment where the systems get exposed. That's where playbooks thin out. That's where the game stops being about structure and starts being about responsibility. And that responsibility landed squarely on Devin Booker. Not with theatrics, not with chest pounding, just with presence. Possession after possession, staying attached to the game while everything around him felt slightly off. That's the part that doesn't show up in the highlights. The patience it takes to wait for the moment without forcing it. When the shot finally came, late, contested, no margin for error, it wasn't about confidence. It was about acceptance. Acceptance that if this night was going to be saved, it wasn't going to be pretty. It was going to be personal. The three goes down, the crowd erupts, and everybody talks about the shot. But the real story is what came before it. Because some teams need everything aligned to win. And some stars are there for the nights when alignment fails. When the system bends, when the math doesn't look friendly. When the game asks a simple, uncomfortable question. Who's willing to carry this? Tonight, Devin Booker answered it. And as we move through the rest of this weekend, through stars, pressure, and franchises staring at themselves in the mirror, keep that in mind. Because not every team has someone who can save a night like that. And some teams are about to find out what that really costs. Booker saved a night that was slipping away, but not every star has to rescue chaos. Some get to operate inside something more stable, something that already knows who it trusts. This one wasn't chaos. This one was certain. Because from the opening minutes, the Boston Celtics didn't look like a team searching for answers. They looked like a team making a statement. And the statement wasn't subtle. It came through Jaylen Brown. Now, 50 points will always grab attention. It should. But this wasn't one of those nights where a game sneaks up on you and suddenly the box score shocks you. This was intentional. This was Boston walking into Los Angeles and deciding early that this game wasn't going to be a negotiation. They put up 146 on the road against a team built around star power and postseason expectations. And the thing that stood out wasn't just the scoring, it was how comfortable everyone was letting Jaylen Brown drive the night. There was no hesitation, no looking around for permission, No sense that this was borrowed time until someone else took over. Possession after possession, Boston stayed in rhythm because they trusted who was leading it. And that's the part that matters, because plenty of players can score when things break right. Fewer players get to score like that because the organization behind them has fully committed. This wasn't about Brown proving that he belongs. It was about Boston showing that they already know. By halftime, the game felt decided, not because the Clippers stopped playing, but because Boston never loosened its grip. The spacing stayed clean, the pace stayed controlled, and Brown stayed aggressive without ever forcing the moment. That's growth, not just as a scorer, but as a pillar and a leader. There's a difference between being talented and being trusted, between being capable and being empowered. This game lived in that difference, and Boston crossed it without blinking. So when people talk about 50 points, they'll remember the number. But what I'll remember is the ease, the confidence, the absence of doubt. Because when a franchise reaches that point, when a night like this feels natural instead of surprising, that's when you stop asking if something works and start asking just how far it can go. And then when a franchise reaches this point, when trust isn't debated anymore, when belief doesn't need permission, the conversation shifts again. Because proving something and sustaining it are not the same thing. One is about arrival, and the other is about endurance. This wasn't the blowout ease of a 30-point lead. This was the leaf blower wind of a game that could go either way, where every possession felt like a test, where the Hornets clawed back from double-digit deficits and made every point matter. And then there was Giannis Antetokounmpo. And in that moment, at the rim, with 4.7 seconds left on a lob from Kevin Porter Jr., there was no room for hesitation, no luxury of separation, no margin for error. He put it down with authority. That dunk, that one that won the game, didn't feel like a highlight you hoped for. It felt like the answer that a team needed. The kind of answer only someone who has been in this space for years can give you without wavering. Because greatness isn't always about explosion. Sometimes it's about the quiet, relentless insistence that you will not let this slip away. And here's the wrinkle. On top of winning the game, he did something the league rarely sees. He stacked up another historic type of stat line. 30 points, double-digit rebounds, and multiple assists, a mark that pushed him past some of the all-time greats into his own territory. So when we say that sustaining greatness, this is what we mean. Not just winning, not just scoring, responding when the margin disappears, remaining calm when the scoreboard tightens, anchoring the moment when everyone else feels the weight. And that's a different chapter from Booker saving a night, and from Brown's team trusting him with the night. Giannis lives in a room where there's no relief from expectation, and not many others do. And when you step back from all of that, Booker carrying the night, Brown being trusted with one, and Giannis sustaining an era, a pattern starts to show itself. Because pressure doesn't just test players, it tests structures, it tests relationships. It exposes whether a franchise actually knows who it's building around and why. Some teams have clarity, some teams have alignment, and some teams are standing right at the edge of a decision that they can't delay any longer. And that's where the Atlanta Hawks find themselves. While other stars spent this weekend answering the moment, the Atlanta Hawks are asking a much bigger question. Not about a single game, but about identity, about direction, about whether what they've been trying to be is still worth holding on to. And that's the story that we have to talk about next. If this is the way you watch the game, if you care about the why as much as the what, make sure that you're subscribed. Wherever you're listening, share this episode with someone who doesn't just check scores, but actually feels the league moving. And if you ever want to be a part of the conversation, the call-in line is always open, 216-452-8813. I listen to every message. All right, now let's talk about Atlanta. Atlanta didn't wake up one morning and decide to blow it up. That's the part that keeps getting lost. The Atlanta Hawks came into this season trying to decide, not detonate. Decide. Decide what was real, what was salvageable, and what was simply just familiar. Because for years now, Atlanta has lived on that uncomfortable middle. Good enough to matter, but not stable enough to trust. Competitive, but never settled. Loud in flashes, quiet when it counted. And eventually, that kind of existence forces a reckoning. This season was supposed to give them clarity. That's why the Kristaps Porzingis move mattered. It wasn't random. It wasn't desperate. It was intentional. Spacing, rim protection, a counterbalance, a real attempt to change the geometry of the floor and the burden on their star. Because if you're going to build around a lead guard long term, you need structure that holds when the game tightens. Atlanta wanted to know if that structure could finally exist here. And now, weeks later, the noise has shifted. Names are available. Conversations are open. The language has softened in a way it never does when things are aligned. And suddenly, it feels like the Hawks aren't asking how to fix things. They're asking who they actually are. Which brings us to the unavoidable center of this conversation. Trae Young. Trae Young is one of the most gifted offensive players of his generation. That part is not up for debate. The shooting range, the vision, the audacity, the way he bends coverage the moment he crosses half court, he has changed how defenses have to think, how bigs have to play, how spacing is taught. But here's the honest question Atlanta has been circling for years now, and it's not a disrespectful one. What does building with Trae actually require? Because the assumption around the league is simple. Wherever Trae Young goes, he lifts the floor. He electrifies a franchise. He changes the temperature, and in short bursts, that's absolutely true. But Atlanta isn't deciding on bursts anymore. They're deciding on identity. And identity asks much harder questions. It asks whether the defense can survive. Not hide, survive. It asks whether teammates can feel empowered instead of orbiting. It asks whether late-game offenses can become collaborative instead of compulsory. This isn't about effort. This isn't about care. This is about physics, size, matchups, trade-offs. Every Trae-led possession creates an advantage on one end and a calculation on the other. Atlanta has been doing that math for years now. Sometimes it balances, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the margin disappears fast. That's the part fans don't always want to hear because it sounds like criticism. But that's really an evaluation, an honest, uncomfortable evaluation, the kind that front offices are paid to make. Trae's game demands hierarchy. It needs clarity about who has the ball, when, and why. That's not a flaw, but it's a constraint. And constraints can shape rosters, rotations, and patience. Atlanta tried to adjust around it. They tried multiple defensive looks, multiple front court combinations, multiple second options. The Porzingis acquisition was another attempt to solve the same equation, this time from a different angle. But at some point, you stop asking whether the puzzle pieces fit and start asking whether you're building the right picture at all. That's why this moment feels heavier than a trade rumor. Because this isn't about whether Trae can play somewhere else. Of course he can. The question is whether Atlanta believes the version of basketball required to maximize him aligns with where they want to go next. And that's where Zachary Rishisher quietly enters the conversation. Because when young, foundational pieces start getting mentioned in broader discussions, it signals something deeper than impatience. It signals timeline uncertainty. It signals a front office weighing present volatility against future flexibility. Atlanta is standing at a fork. One path says double down, commit fully, shape everything around Trae's gravity and accept the costs that come with it. The other says reset the frame, recalibrate responsibility, choose balance over brilliance. Neither path is cowardly, and neither path is wrong. But choosing neither, staying in between, it's already proved unsustainable. This is the hard truth that Atlanta is confronting right now. Not in panic, not in anger, but in clarity. Because while other teams spent this weekend answering pressure with execution, the Hawks are staring at a quieter, heavier pressure, the kind that doesn't show up in box scores. The pressure to admit what is instead of chasing what might be. This isn't about tearing Trae Young down. It's about being honest about what building with him asks of everyone else, and whether that's a question that Atlanta still wants to keep answering. That's not a failure. That's adulthood. And what comes next? Trade, reset, recommitment? It won't be sudden. It'll be the result of years of evidence finally outweighing hope. Atlanta didn't plan to blow it up. They planned to decide. And now, the decision is here. Here's the part of the Trae Young conversation that usually gets skipped. Not because that it's uncomfortable, but because it doesn't fit neatly into headlines. When we say that a player changes a franchise, what do we actually mean? Do we mean relevance, excitement, national TV games, or do we mean the outcomes? Because Trae Young has absolutely changed how Atlanta is perceived. He gave them an identity when they didn't have one. He made them loud. He made them watchable. He made them matter again. That's real and it counts. But if we're being honest, and honesty is the only way that this conversation works, the proof doesn't fully extend past that moment. That Eastern Conference Finals run lives largely in the memory, and it should. Madison Square Garden, the confidence, the audacity, a young team punching upward without fear. But the problem with peak moments is that they ask dangerous questions afterward. What came next? Because since then, Atlanta hasn't built momentum. They've cycled. Different co-stars, different schemes, different attempts to find balance without ever settling into it. And at some point, you have to ask whether the instability is bad luck or if it's structural. This isn't about Trae being selfish. It's about his game demanding a certain gravity. Everything bends towards him. And when everything bends, it becomes harder for other players to grow without permission. Some stars elevate by amplifying others. Some elevate by replacing the need for them. Trae lives closer to the second lane. That doesn't make him lesser, but it changes what helping a team actually looks like. Because helping isn't just producing points. It's creating an environment where others become more than what they were before you arrived. And that's where the evidence gets complicated. Atlanta has won games with Trae. They've had moments with Trae, but they haven't sustained growth with Trae. That doesn't mean he can't do it somewhere else. It means that whoever believes that he does has to understand the cost. Because Trae doesn't come with a blueprint. He is the blueprint. And if the franchise isn't ready to redraw everything around him, the results won't change. This is why Atlanta isn't panicking. They're reflecting. They're asking whether the thing that once gave them life is now preventing their evolution. Whether the version of winning Trae enables still aligns with the version of winning that they want to pursue. And that's not betrayal. That's responsibility. The hardest part of growth for players and franchises alike isn't realizing what you're good at. It's realizing what you can't keep doing. Trae Young changed Atlanta. question now isn't whether he can change another franchise, it's whether that franchise truly understands what that change demands. Before we close this out, a quick word from our partner. One thing we talk about a lot on this show is energy. Not just on the court, but in real life. Where you spend it, what you give it to, and what actually gives something back. That's why W works for me. No sugar crashes, no artificial junk, just clean energy that doesn't ask you to trade focus for burnout. Whether you're watching late games, recording, working, or just trying to stay sharp through a long day, W fits into that rhythm without hijacking it. If you've been curious about trying it, head to w.gg and use the code RoundballRants. That lets them know you came from us, and it helps keeps this show moving the way that we want it to. Because, just like on the court, you don't trade your energy for anything that doesn't give something back. So now, let's finish this thing the right way. Sometimes the hardest part of growth isn't learning something new. It's realizing that the answer you've been living by doesn't fit anymore. We don't talk about that enough. Not in basketball, not in life. We celebrate arrival. We celebrate breakthroughs. We celebrate the first time that something works. But we rarely prepare ourselves for the moment after. The moment when the thing that once saved us starts asking for more than what it gives back. This weekend gave us a quiet lesson in that. We watched one player carry a night because everything around him broke down. Another step into trust because the foundation beneath him finally held. And another shoulder the weight of expectation not to become great, but to remain it. 3 different stages of the same truth. And then there's Atlanta. Not loud, not dramatic, just still. Still long enough to hear what the evidence has been whispering to him for years. There's nothing wrong with something working for a season of your life. There's nothing wrong with it being shaped by it. And there's nothing wrong with being grateful for what it gave you. The mistake comes when we confuse gratitude with obligation. When we stay loyal to a version of ourselves or a version of success simply because it once made sense, because it once gave us confidence, because it once felt like home. But growth has a way of changing the room. What once felt electric can start to feel heavy. What once felt freeing can start to feel limiting. And what once felt like belief can slowly turn into expectation. That's not failure. That's information. And the bravest thing that any person or any franchise can do is stop long enough to listen to it. Because clarity doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly. It arrives when you finally admit what you've been avoiding. It arrives when you stop asking, how do I make this work? And start asking, what am I actually building toward? That's a hard moment. It asks you to let go of certainty, to release control, to risk disappointing people who are still attached to an old version of you. But that's the cost of honesty. And honesty is the only thing that creates peace, on the court or in the locker room or in your own life. So if this episode resonated with you, maybe it's not about basketball at all. Maybe it's about that place you've been standing, that question that you've been circling, that feeling that something isn't wrong, but it doesn't feel right either. Sometimes the answer isn't to push harder. Sometimes the answer is to choose differently, to trust that what you've carried here, you don't have to carry forever. I'm Vincent Cooper. This was Roundball Rants. Thank you for spending this time with me. And remember, it's not just basketball. It's therapy with a bounce.